When you are pricing your 3D prints, to make sure you consider all your costs. If you don't understand all your costs, then you don't really know what you're actually going to be left with after it's all done. Most people actually undercharge when they start their business. And that is because they'll look at their filament cost and that is the only thing that they consider. Then the next thing is they'll be looking at what other people are charging and base their price on that. And that is also problematic because how do you know what the other person is doing? Do they have a profitable business, or are they just doing this in their backyard and it's just fueling their hobby? You don't always just use a competitor's price when you're pricing something. Next is they don't have a clear structure. You're kind of guessing, kind of done by feel. Today we're going to give a structure. And then the last one, when you're face to face with someone and you got to tell them a price, you're scared that they'll say no if you give a price that's too high. You might be also scared to be called unfair, or like you don't want to be taking advantage of someone because you don't want to charge too much. So the result of all of these decisions is that you usually make sales, but you're not going to make as much profit. So you'll be busy working, but it's not going to be really reflected in your bank account. So today we'll show why beginners undercharge, all the costs that you actually have to take into account when you're pricing something. So there's a lot more than you might think. 3 different pricing methods. So these are like giving structure to your actual approach when you're pricing something. And then we're going to talk about perceived value. Okay, so first, the theory. Why is pricing really important? The price is going to be the biggest lever that you can use to increase your profit. We can increase our profit by increasing the price and how many sales, but the cost, we can't push that down infinitely, right? You can't make your cost 0, but the price that you charge, there's no ceiling on how high you can go. And that profit that we generate is going to be the main tool, the main asset that we use to grow the business. So you could have the perfect product, the strongest marketing, thousands of sales, but if your pricing is wrong, the business still fails. If you charge really low prices, you're going to attract people that are looking for cheap items. If you put higher prices, you're going to attract people that are looking for better, more quality, better service, all of those things.
Yeah. And it does really depend on the type of business that you want to build, because you see some of these businesses that are reducing their costs in order to increase their profits, and then they end up with a cheaper product, maybe a lower quality product. I would rather increase the value of the product, make it more premium, make it more special to someone, and rather than reducing costs, you can even increase the cost of your product and then therefore the value to your customer as well.
Yeah, 100%. And like sometimes you want those cheap items, like both business models work. But when we're thinking about 3D printing, I have to maintain the machines. I've got to print each item and take it off the bed. Like there's a lot of work that goes into it. So being able to sell thousands of products takes a lot of effort and time. It's not like you're getting them mass produced and they come in boxes from your supplier and you just have to send it out. There's a lot of labor that goes
It definitely seems like for most 3D printing business, you would rather charge more than less.
Go for that value route rather than the volume route, because you can sell a lot of something for lower margins. Like that's a valid business model. But for 3D printing, it's going to be difficult to do it that way unless you really highly automate your process and you find those products that still give you healthy margins. So the beginner's mistake, it's easier to undercharge, really. Like it's just something that you want to make sales, so you charge less and then people buy it and that's great and it feels good. But what most people will do is they'll look into the slicer and go, okay, this cost me $1 of filament or 50 cents of filament. And then I'll multiply my filament cost by some number, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. And then that will be their price. So what I've seen from running my business, and I do this on the side of working here at 3D Printer Gear, but last financial year, we did about $50,000 in revenue. And filament cost was like not even close to the highest cost of, if you like broke down all our costs for the financial year. We spent more money on postage, for example. If you take GST and tax into account, you spend more money on that. The depreciation of machines or buying machines and maintenance. So filament ended up being a very low cost. And if you don't take other costs into account, you're missing the whole picture, right?
And like even just within the filament cost itself, there's the cost of going to get the material. Maybe you drive to pick it up, or maybe you order it online and that maybe takes you 5 minutes. And over the year, that can add up.
That cost of filament is also if no prints fail as well. So there's no contingencies there. Contingencies, something wrong happens, There's no account for that. Cool. All right, so what's the solution? So first, understand all your costs. There's a big list here, right? First, the filament costs, which we talked about. Then it's labor. And this is usually the biggest one. If you want to take labor into account, actually pay yourself a wage, then that is going to be pretty much always, in my experience, bigger than your filament costs. Packaging, shipping, failed prints. So this is taking failed prints into account. So how do you take failed prints into account? But most people do have failed prints. So you might want to measure what your failure rate is roughly and just multiply your filament cost by some value. So it could be like you add 10%. So you multiply it by 1.1. So you're assuming 1 out of every 10 prints might fail. Even if it's not 1 out of every 10, that might be a good contingency to have because you're taking that into account. A failed print might not be your printer's fault. It might not be the material. Like there could be a material jam. There could be a jam in the nozzle. It could be a power outage. And then like when you resume everything, it has that line in it that you don't like. So that's failed prints. Transaction fees, that's an important one. So if you're taking payments online, different platforms that take payments will have different fees.
Yeah.
So usually when we'll price for the highest one that you offer. So like we use and that's like 6% or 6% or something like that. So taxes, any local taxes, you might offer discount codes on your website. So like we'll often do like a 10% off your first order, something like that. And when you have a sale, that could be higher. Printer depreciation. So your printer's like a car, like it's not going to last forever, right? You have to replace it one day. So if you buy a machine for $2,000 and you can get 10,000 hours out of it with maintenance, which you also have to pay on top of that, then every hour that you run it costs a certain amount because eventually you have to replace it. That's what printer depreciation is talking about. Electricity as well, which is usually quite low, but it should be there, especially if you're running a lot of prints. This calculator, you put in all your costs, labor, packaging, shipping, everything. And then it'll break down and show you what your profit and your profit margin is. If you just start with your filament cost, you're going to get a very high profit margin. But when you start adding all the other costs, it'll become less and less and less.
It's sort of like that feeling when you go to the supermarket and you're like, oh my God, I've just spent like $80, but it was like everything was $2.
It just adds up. You don't expect it to. So yeah, you need to take all your costs into account. All right. Then we talk about types of pricing. The calculator doesn't calculate the price. It calculates how much profit you'll make when you take the price and you compare it against all of your costs. That's what the calculator does. So there's 3 types of pricing methods that we can use. One is just called markup pricing. So you take your costs and you multiply them by some value. So if you multiply it by 2 or 3 or 4 or whatever, then you'll just get different profit margins. And what we basically explain to people that are just starting off is that aiming generally for your cost multiplied by 5, which will give you a profit margin of 80%, is ideal because as you want to grow your business, usually your costs will start to increase as well. So starting from a more profitable space of 80% profit margin is ideal. So that means that whatever my cost is, I multiply that by 5. Then with comparison pricing, we're going to take our competitors and basically sit ourselves somewhere compared to our competitors. So if there's someone else selling the same thing and my business strategy is to sell a lot more of them for a lower price, then I might sit myself slightly under their price and go for more volume. But like we were saying, usually we're going to say sell it for more, provide more value, especially when you're 3D printing, just because you put a lot of your own time and effort into making these products. Every single product you got to take off the print bed, right? And if you sit yourself higher, then it's just understanding that we're going to try and justify that somehow. But it's important also to mention here is that when we're talking about comparison pricing, sometimes a comparison is made with your product and sometimes it's not. And it could be the same product. So what I mean by that is like, say I'm selling something on Facebook Marketplace and someone searches on Facebook Marketplace for bed frames and it comes up with 20 bed frames. I'm going to be compared because I'm literally being shown other people's bed frames next to my bed frames. But if I get someone on my website, I sell a unique product and they're just on my website, they've got the problem that my product solves, they're not as likely to compare your product with someone else's. Not as likely. They still might with certain things, but your job is to make your thing unique. And why is this important to say? When something is unique, it's harder to compare. 3D printing can make any shape with all these different colors, with all these different designs, all these different customizations. So you can make something that is unique. You just need to apply a little bit of your willingness to make something unique. Say I go to Woolworths or a supermarket and I'm going to buy blueberries, right? I don't overly care really where the blueberries came from. I might go, oh, okay, if they're a bit more organic, I might pay a slightly bit extra. But for the most part, I'm just buying blueberries for my 2 kids. I'm just going to get the cheapest one for the most blueberries. That's pretty much all I do. And so I just compare what's on special, what's the prices, and whatever. That is what you want to try to avoid with your 3D printing products. I would just avoid that entirely by making something that's not comparable. But you can sell blueberries, but you just need to show people why your blueberries are different and why you should value them differently. So there's a toilet paper brand here in Australia called like Who Gives a Crap? And they sell toilet paper. Now, same thing. Toilet paper is just like a commodity. I'm just going to buy the cheapest one for the most amount of toilet paper, right? But this brand has positioned themselves like there's no plastic, it's sustainable, all of that. And that's how they can charge more.
And then it comes back to the emotion that you feel when you purchase it. You feel better about yourself because you're doing something good for the environment. So then you're happy because you feel like you're adding value.
Yeah, it's important to those people. We're not wasting this plastic, right? And that's what really this perceived value comes down to. So, and then the last one is value-based pricing. These are like tools that you can use to help set your price. But you might use all 3 or 2 of them or something like that. But value-based pricing is saying, provided I am making a certain amount of profit, how much is someone willing to pay here? How can I increase the value more and more? Just like we were talking about with the toilet paper, how can I show people that this is worth more and more?
A good way might be like markup is what's the least that I can charge. Value based is like what's the most that I can charge. And then a comparison is like, okay, realistically, what in the middle should I charge? Yeah.
So if you create a product, you've added up all your costs, then you'll have a certain markup value. So you times it by 5, and then you might go, okay, for this 3D printed product, when I multiply it by 5, the markup is telling me I'm going to sell that for $100. And then I go to compare, okay, is there anyone else in the market that's doing this? Okay, if they're around $100, then all right, sweet. But what if they're $20 and I'm selling it on Etsy and it's the same platform and other people are going to see all those listings and I'm 100 and they're 20? What difference do I give? So basically use these tools together. So you do the markup. What do I need to charge to get 80% profit margin? Compare it to other people's products or the closest thing that you can compare to. And can you justify that, or how do you show people that value? Then value-based is, okay, fine, you might hit this number of $100, but will people pay 120 if you provided this and this with it? Or even will they just pay 120 for the same product? What do we need to show people to show them that it's more valuable? Conclusion, sell your products for more. And if you want to learn more, jump to our 3D printing school community. We do webinars and stuff like this every week. We've got free courses, a whole bunch of free courses. Go print the future. And if you have any questions, shoot them through.